The crisp autumn morning at Buckingham Palace was like any other for Guardsman Marcus Thompson. He stood perfectly still at his post by the palace gates, his red tunic immaculate, his black bearskin hat positioned precisely, and his rifle, held at the exact angle drilled into him during countless hours of training. The tourists were already gathering, cameras ready, hoping to catch a glimpse of the famous guards who never moved, never spoke, and never broke their stoic expression. Marcus had been serving in the Queen's Guard for 8 years. At 26, he was considered one of the most disciplined and reliable guardsmen in his regiment. His commanding officers praised his unwavering focus and his ability to remain completely motionless for hours, regardless of weather, distractions, or the constant attempts by tourists to make him react. The morning crowd was typical for a Saturday in October. Families with excited children pressed against the ornate iron gates, taking selfies and marveling at the grandeur of the palace behind the guards. Street performers entertained the gathering crowds nearby, their music mixing with the chatter of dozens of different languages. As visitors from around the world absorbed the pageantry of British royal tradition, Marcus had learned to filter out most of the noise and movement around him. His eyes remained fixed straight ahead, but his peripheral vision was always alert for anything unusual. Security was paramount, and every guardsman was trained to be aware of their surroundings while maintaining their ceremonial duties. Near the gates, a group of schoolchildren on a field trip clustered around their teacher, who was explaining the history of the palace and the role of the guards. The children, around 7 or 8 years old, were fascinated by Marcus and his fellow guardsmen stationed 20 feet away. They whispered among themselves, daring each other to try to make the guards smile or move. They looked like toy soldiers. One little girl said loudly enough for Marcus to hear. She had bright blonde hair tied in pigtails and wore a red school uniform that almost matched his tunic. "Do you think they're real people?" Her teacher gently shushed her. But Marcus caught a glimpse of the child's curious blue eyes studying him intently. She seemed different from the other children somehow, more observant, more thoughtful in her examination of the guards and their surroundings. The morning progressed normally until around 10:30. When Marcus noticed a commotion developing near the street corner, a delivery truck was attempting to navigate the narrow road beside the palace, its driver clearly struggling with the heavy Saturday traffic. The vehicle was larger than usual for this area, and Marcus filed this information away automatically. As he had been trained to notice anything out of the ordinary, the same little girl from earlier had somehow separated from her school group and was now standing much closer to the gates, apparently fascinated by the intricate ironwork and the royal coat of arms emblazoned on the entrance. She traced the patterns with her finger, completely absorbed in the details. Marcus felt a slight concern as he watched her edge closer to the road. But children wandering near the gates was not uncommon. The area was generally safe, with barriers and designated pedestrian zones keeping visitors at a reasonable distance from traffic. Still, something made him keep a closer eye on her than he normally would on the tourists. The delivery truck continued its awkward progress down the street, its engine straining under what appeared to be a heavy load. The driver seemed inexperienced with the route, stopping and starting frequently as he tried to navigate around parked cars and pedestrians. Other drivers behind him began honking their horns in frustration. It was then that Marcus noticed something that made his blood run cold. The truck's brake lights flickered erratically, sometimes working and sometimes not. Worse, he could see fluid dripping from beneath the vehicle, a dark puddle that suggested serious mechanical problems. The truck was clearly having brake failure, but the driver seemed unaware of the danger. The little girl, meanwhile, had dropped something, a small toy or coin, and it had rolled into the street. Without thinking, she stepped off the curb to retrieve it, directly into the path where the struggling truck would pass in just seconds. Time seemed to slow down for Marcus. Every instinct screamed at him to break protocol, to abandon his post, to shout a warning. But years of training kept him frozen in place for a crucial split second. Guards did not leave their posts. Guards did not break formation. Guards maintained their positions no matter what happened around them. But as the truck bore down on the small girl, who was bent over trying to pick up her dropped item, Marcus made a decision that would change everything. In one fluid motion, He dropped his rifle and sprinted toward the child, his heavy boots pounding on the pavement. The crowd gasped as the immaculately disciplined guards suddenly burst into motion. Tourists raised their cameras, thinking this must be part of some ceremony they didn't understand. The other guardsman at his post remained perfectly still, as protocol demanded, but his eyes tracked Marcus's movement with barely concealed concern. Marcus reached the little girl just as the truck's brakes gave out completely. The driver was pumping the brake pedal frantically, his horn blaring in warning. But the heavy vehicle was gaining speed as it rolled down the slight incline toward the palace. With no time to be gentle, Marcus scooped the child up in his arms and dove sideways. Rolling both of them away from the truck's path, the massive vehicle thundered past them, missing them by mere inches, before crashing into a row of concrete barriers designed to protect the palace perimeter. The crash was tremendous. The truck's cargo, which turned out to be construction equipment, scattered across the road with a noise like thunder. Steam hissed from the destroyed radiator, and the driver climbed out shakily, apparently unhurt, but clearly shaken by his narrow escape from a much more serious accident. But Marcus wasn't, looking at the truck or thinking about the crash. As he sat on the pavement, still holding the little girl protectively in his arms, something extraordinary was happening. The child was looking up at him with those bright blue eyes, and Marcus felt as if he was seeing something impossible. For just a moment, a split second that seemed to stretch into eternity, the little girl's face seemed to shimmer and change. Her features became more refined, more mature, and there was something in her expression that spoke of wisdom far beyond her apparent age. It was as if he was looking at two people occupying the same small body, the curious child she appeared to be, and someone else entirely. "Thank you," she whispered, and her voice carried harmonics that seemed to resonate in Marcus's very bones. "You have done something very important today." Marcus blinked, and suddenly she was just a little girl again, frightened but unhurt, looking up at the guard who had saved her life. But the image of that other face, that other presence, was burned into his memory. Around them, chaos erupted. Police sirens wailed in the distance. Palace security rushed to secure the scene, and the crowd of tourists pressed forward to see what had happened. Cameras flashed and people shouted questions. But Marcus heard none of it. All he could think about was what he had seen in that child's face, and the growing certainty that this morning's events were far more significant than a simple traffic accident. Something had just happened that would change his life forever, and he was only beginning to understand what it might mean. As medical personnel arrived to check on the little girl and Marcus was helped to his feet by his fellow guards, he couldn't shake the feeling that he had just participated in something that went far beyond his duties as a Queen's Guard. The question that would haunt him for hours to come was simple but profound. Who was this child really? And what had he truly saved her from? The aftermath of the incident unfolded like a carefully choreographed dance. Within minutes, the area around Buckingham Palace was swarming with police officers, paramedics, and palace security personnel. The crashed truck was surrounded by emergency vehicles, their flashing lights creating a kaleidoscope of red and blue against the ornate palace. Marcus found himself sitting in the back of an ambulance, a blanket draped over his shoulders despite his protests that he was perfectly fine. A paramedic was checking his pulse and examining a small scrape on his elbow, the only injury he had sustained during his dramatic rescue. "You're very lucky," the paramedic said. "Cleaning the minor wound? That was quite a tumble you took. How are you feeling? Any dizziness or confusion?" Marcus wanted to laugh. Confusion didn't begin to describe his mental state. He kept replaying those few seconds when he had looked into the little girl's face and seen ... What exactly? He wasn't even sure how to put it into words. "I'm fine," he replied automatically, though he was anything but fine. His hands were still shaking slightly, not from the physical exertion of the rescue, but from the strange encounter with whatever he had glimpsed in the child's eyes. Across the cordoned-off area, he could see the little girl sitting with a woman who appeared to be her teacher. The child seemed completely unharmed, chatting animatedly with the adults around her, as if nothing unusual had happened. She looked perfectly normal now, just an excited 8-year-old who had been part of an adventure she would probably remember for the rest of her life. But Marcus couldn't forget what he had seen. In that moment of contact, when he had held her in his arms immediately after the rescue, she had seemed like someone else entirely. Her face had taken on an otherworldly quality. Her eyes had held depths of knowledge that no child should possess, and her voice had carried resonances that seemed to speak directly to his soul. Guardsman Thompson, a firm voice interrupted his thoughts. Marcus looked up to see Lieutenant Colonel Harrison, the commanding officer of his regiment, approaching with a stern expression. "We need to discuss what happened here." Marcus immediately stood and snapped to attention. Despite the blanket still draped around his shoulders, "Yes, sir. At ease, Thompson. First, let me say that your actions potentially saved that child's life. However, you did abandon your post without authorization, dropped your weapon, and broke protocol in front of hundreds of witnesses and cameras." Marcus felt his stomach sink. He had known this conversation was coming, but hearing it stated so bluntly made the reality of his situation clear. "Sir, I understand the severity of my actions. I was prepared to face the consequences when I made the decision to intervene." Lieutenant Colonel Harrison studied him for a long moment. "What exactly did you see that made you act so decisively?" "The official reports indicate that the truck's brakes failed. But from your position, how could you have known the child was in imminent danger?" This was the question Marcus had been dreading. How could he explain that he had seen something in the child that had compelled him to act? How could he describe the sense of destiny, of cosmic importance, that had driven him to abandon everything he had been trained to do? "Sir, I observed the truck experiencing mechanical difficulties, erratic brake lights and fluid leaking from the undercarriage. When I saw the child enter the vehicle's path to retrieve a dropped item, I calculated that collision was inevitable unless immediate action was taken. It was a perfectly reasonable, logical explanation that omitted the most important part of the truth." Lieutenant Colonel Harrison nodded slowly, apparently satisfied with this response. "Your observational skills and quick thinking are commendable, Thompson. However, proper protocol would have been to alert other personnel while maintaining your post. The fact that your intervention was successful doesn't negate the serious breach of duty." Before Marcus could respond, another figure approached their conversation. The man was in civilian clothes, but carried himself with the bearing of someone accustomed to authority. His presence seemed to command immediate respect from Lieutenant Colonel Harrison. Colonel Harrison, the newcomer, said with a slight nod, "I am Inspector Davies, a special branch. I need to speak with Guardsman Thompson about this morning's incident." Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. Special Branch was responsible for protecting high-profile individuals and investigating threats to national security. Why would they be interested in a simple traffic accident? Inspector Davies gestured for Marcus to follow him to a quieter area away from the crowd. "Guardsman Thompson, I understand you made physical contact with the child during the rescue. Did she say anything to you? Anything unusual or memorable?" The question hit Marcus like a physical blow. How could Inspector Davies possibly know about their brief exchange? "She thanked me, sir. That's all." Inspector Davies studied Marcus's face with the intensity of someone trained to detect deception. "Nothing else? No other communication of any kind?" Marcus hesitated. The child had said something about him doing something important. But how could that possibly be relevant to a security investigation? "She mentioned that I had done something important. I assume she was referring to the rescue itself." "Describe exactly how she said it. Her tone, her manner, anything that struck you as unusual?" Marcus felt as if he was walking through a minefield. Every instinct told him that there were layers to this situation that he didn't understand, and that his answers might have consequences he couldn't foresee. Her voice seemed mature for her age, more formal than I would expect from a child who had just experienced a traumatic event. But people react differently to shock, so I didn't think much of it at the time. Inspector Davies made a note in a small notebook. "Did you notice anything else about her appearance, her behavior, anything that seemed out of the ordinary?" This was it, the moment Marcus had to decide how much truth to reveal. He thought about the shimmering change he had witnessed in the child's face, the sense of looking at someone far older and more significant than she appeared to be. "No, sir. She seemed like a normal child on a school trip. Inspector Davies closed his notebook. But his expression suggested he wasn't entirely satisfied with Marcus's responses. Guardsman Thompson, I want you to understand that this incident may have implications beyond what's immediately apparent. If you remember anything else, any detail, however small, I want you to contact me immediately. He handed Marcus a card with only a phone number printed on it. This is a direct line. Use it if anything comes to mind, or if you experience anything unusual in the coming days. Marcus stared at the card. Sir, may I ask why Special Branch is involved in what appeared to be an accident? Inspector Davies was quiet for a moment, as if weighing how much information to share. Let's just say that the child you rescued today is significant to certain ongoing security matters. Your actions may have prevented more than just a traffic fatality. With that cryptic statement, Inspector Davies walked away, leaving Marcus more confused than ever. He looked across the scene toward where the little girl had been sitting, but she was gone. The school group had apparently been taken away while he was being questioned. As the emergency vehicles began to disperse and normal traffic resumed around the palace, Marcus was finally allowed to return to his duties. He retrieved his rifle from where it had been secured by other guards and took his position at the gate once again, but everything had changed. As he stood in his familiar spot, maintaining the same perfect posture and stoic expression he had practiced for years, Marcus's mind raced with questions. Who was the child really? Why was Special Branch interested in her? And most importantly, what had he actually seen when he looked into her face during those crucial seconds after the rescue? The tourists began to gather again, taking their photos and making their jokes about the motionless guards. But Marcus was no longer the same person who had stood at this post that morning. He had glimpsed something beyond the ordinary world. Something that suggested there were forces and mysteries at work that he had never imagined as the day wore on. Marcus found himself scanning every face in the crowd, wondering if he would see her again and whether he would recognize her if she returned. The little girl with the blue eyes had changed his life in a matter of seconds, and he had the unsettling feeling that their encounter was just the beginning of something much larger and more important than he could possibly understand. That evening, Marcus sat in his small flat near the barracks, staring at Inspector Davies's business card. The events of the day played over and over in his mind like a film he couldn't stop watching. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the little girl's face transforming in that split second of contact, the way her features had seemed to age and refine. The wisdom that had looked out through her young eyes. His mobile phone rang, startling him from his thoughts. The caller ID showed his mother's number. Marcus, love, I saw the news about what happened at the palace today. Are you all right? His mother's worried voice filled the quiet room. Marcus realized that of course the incident would have made the news. A Queen's Guard abandoning his post to rescue a child would be exactly the kind of human interest. Story that television producers loved. I'm fine. Ma'am, just did what anyone would have done. The reporter said, you risked your career to save that little girl. They showed the footage from people's phones. It was terrifying how close that truck came to hitting. Her Marcus hadn't thought about the fact that dozens of tourists had been filming when the incident occurred. By now, the rescue was probably all over social media and news websites around the world. Have they said anything about the child? Is she all right? Oh yes, they interviewed her teacher. Said the little girl was completely unharmed, thank goodness. But Marcus, there's something odd about the coverage. What do you mean? Well, they're not showing the child's face in any of the footage. And they haven't released her name or which school she was from. Don't you think that's strange? Usually in these stories, they want to interview everyone involved. Marcus felt a chill run through him. His mother was right. It was unusual for the media to be so careful about protecting a child's identity in a heroic rescue story, unless someone with considerable authority had instructed them to do so. After ending the call with his mother, Marcus turned on the television to see the coverage for himself. The story was indeed everywhere. Hero Guard saves child and split-second rescue ran across the bottom of the BBC News. Broadcast. The footage was dramatic and clear. Multiple camera angles showed Marcus dropping his rifle and sprinting toward the child. The truck bearing down on them both, and the spectacular crash that followed. But his mother was right in every shot. The little girl's face was either blurred out or obscured by clever editing. More interesting was what the reporters weren't saying. They described the truck's brake failure as a mechanical malfunction. Without mentioning any of the details Marcus had observed, there was no speculation about why the truck had been in that area, no interview with the driver, and no discussion of the cargo that had spilled across the road. Marcus muted the television and sat in the growing darkness of his flat, thinking. The more he learned about the aftermath of the rescue, the more convinced he became that there were layers to the situation that went far beyond what appeared on the surface. His phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "Meet me at St. James's Park tomorrow at noon. Come alone." Inspector Davies. Marcus stared at the message. Why couldn't Davies simply interview him at the palace or the barracks like any normal security inquiry? Why the secrecy and the clandestine meeting? That night, Marcus barely slept. When he did manage to doze off, his dreams were filled with images of the little girl's transforming face and the sound of her voice saying that he had done something important. He woke several times in a cold sweat, feeling as if someone was watching him, though his flat was empty and secure. The next morning brought a new development. As Marcus prepared for his duty shift, Lieutenant Colonel Harrison summoned him to his office. "Thompson, there's been a change in your assignment. You're being temporarily transferred to special duties effective immediately." Marcus felt his heart sink. "Sir, is this about yesterday's incident? I understand that disciplinary action was inevitable," but Harrison held up a hand to stop him. "This isn't disciplinary, Thompson. Quite the contrary. Your actions yesterday have brought you to the attention of certain people who have requested your services for a special assignment." "What kind of assignment, sir?" Harrison consulted a file on his desk. "You'll be working with Inspector Davies on a security matter related to yesterday's events. I'm not privy to the details, but I'm told it's a matter of considerable importance." Marcus felt as if the ground was shifting beneath his feet. "Sir, with respect, I'm a guardsman, not an intelligence operative. I don't have training in security investigations, apparently. Your specific experiences and observations from yesterday make you uniquely qualified for this particular assignment. You're to report to Inspector Davies at St. James's Park at noon today." As Marcus left the colonel's office, his mind raced. How did Harrison know about the meeting Davies had arranged? It was as if events were being orchestrated by forces beyond his understanding. St. James's Park at noon was busy with tourists in office, workers enjoying their lunch breaks. Marcus found Inspector Davies sitting on a bench near the lake, feeding ducks and appearing for all the world like any other civil servant taking a break from his duties, punctual. "Good," Davies said, without looking up as Marcus approached. "Sit down, but don't make it obvious we're together." Marcus sat on the opposite end of the bench, feeling ridiculous. "Sir, I have to ask, what is this really about?" Davies scattered the last of his breadcrumbs and finally turned to look at Marcus. "What I'm about to tell you is classified at the highest levels. Your signature on certain documents will be required before we can proceed further." "What documents?" "The Official Secrets Act, for starters. What we're dealing with goes beyond normal security protocols." Davies pulled out a folder from inside his coat. "The child you rescued yesterday isn't who she appears to be." Marcus felt his pulse quicken. "What do you mean?" "Her name, according to the school records, is Sophie Chen, 8 years old, daughter of immigrants from Hong Kong, living in East London with her parents and attending St. Catherine's Primary School." Davies paused meaningfully. "The problem is, Sophie Chen died 3 months ago in a car accident." The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. "That's impossible." "I held her. She spoke to me. She was definitely real." "Oh, she was real. But she wasn't Sophie Chen." Davies leaned closer, lowering his voice. "We believe she was someone else entirely, using the identity of a deceased child to gain access to the palace area." Marcus felt the world spinning around him. "For what purpose? That's what we need to find out. And you, Guardsman Thompson, are the only person who had direct physical contact with her. You may have seen or heard something that could help us understand what we're dealing with." Davies handed him the folder. "Inside this file, you'll find photographs of several individuals who are persons of interest to various security services. I want you to look through them carefully and see if any of the faces remind you of what you saw when you looked at that child. With trembling hands, Marcus opened the folder. The first few photographs showed middle-aged men and women, with the kind of nondescript appearances that suggested professional training in remaining unnoticed. But as he flipped through the pages, his breath caught in his throat. Near the back of the file was a photograph of a woman in her 30s with striking features and intelligent eyes. There was something about her bone structure, the shape of her face, seemed hauntingly familiar. "This one," Marcus said, pointing to the photograph. "There's something about her that reminds me of what I saw." Davies leaned over to see which photo Marcus had selected, and his expression grew grave. "That's Dr. Alina Vasquez, a former physicist who disappeared from a government research facility 6 months ago. She was working on classified projects involving quantum mechanics and theoretical applications I can't discuss." Marcus stared at the photograph. "You think this woman was somehow in that child's body?" "I think," Davies said slowly, "that what you witnessed yesterday was far more complex and dangerous than a simple traffic accident. And I think Dr. Vasquez may have found a way to accomplish something that most people would consider impossible." As the implications of this revelation began to sink in, Marcus realized that his life had taken a turn into territory he had never imagined existed. The little girl he had rescued wasn't just a child in danger. She was apparently something far more mysterious and potentially threatening. "What exactly do you need me to do?" Marcus asked, though he wasn't sure he wanted to hear the answer. Davies closed the folder and looked Marcus directly in the eyes. "We need you to help us find her again. Because whoever or whatever she really is, she's still out there. And we have reason to believe that yesterday's incident was just the beginning of something much bigger." The next few days passed in a blur of briefings, classified documents, and training sessions that Marcus never could have imagined as part of his military career. Inspector Davies had relocated him to a nondescript government building in Westminster, where he found himself in a world of intelligence analysts, surveillance experts, and technologies that seemed borrowed from science fiction films. The facility where Dr. Vasquez worked was conducting research into consciousness transfer, Davies explained during one of their sessions. Theoretical work on whether human awareness could be temporarily relocated from one physical body to another. Marcus struggled to process this information. "And you think she succeeded?" "We know she succeeded. The question is how and what she intends to do with this capability." Davies pulled up a series of images on a large monitor. "These are security camera feeds from around London over the past 3 months, all showing children who appear normal but exhibit behavioral patterns that suggest adult consciousness." The images were disturbing in their ordinariness. Children walking through shopping centers, sitting in parks, boarding buses, but all with a quality of purposeful movement and awareness that seemed too mature for their apparent ages. "How many are there?" Marcus asked. "We've identified at least 12 possible cases, all children who match the general physical description of missing or deceased minors, but who demonstrate knowledge or capabilities beyond their supposed years." Davies switched to another screen showing a map of London with various locations marked in red. "These are the places where sightings have been reported. Notice the pattern." Marcus studied the map. The locations formed a rough circle around central London, with several clusters near government buildings, research facilities, and military installations. "She's conducting reconnaissance," Marcus realized. "Using children as spies because no one suspects them." "Exactly. And the most concerning aspect is that we believe yesterday's incident at Buckingham Palace wasn't an accident. We think Dr. Vasquez deliberately put herself in danger knowing that palace security would respond, giving her the opportunity to make direct contact with someone inside the royal protection system." The implications hit Marcus like a cold wave. "She wanted to be rescued. She wanted to make contact with me specifically." Davies nodded grimly. "Your personnel file indicates that you have an unusually high security clearance for a guardsman. Due to your previous training in communications and electronics, You also have access to palace layouts and security protocols that would be valuable to someone planning an infiltration. Marcus felt sick. But I didn't tell her anything. We barely spoke. Physical contact was enough. We believe she may have technology that allows her to extract information through direct neural interface during moments of intense emotional connection. The room seemed to spin around Marcus. You're saying she read my mind? We're saying it's a possibility we can't ignore, which is why we need to find her before she uses whatever information she may have obtained. Davies led Marcus to another room where a woman in a white lab coat was waiting beside sophisticated electronic equipment. This is Dr. Sarah Mitchell, our specialist in consciousness research. She's going to help us understand exactly what happened during your contact with the subject. Dr. Mitchell was younger than Marcus had expected, with short brown hair and the intense focus of someone completely absorbed in her work. Guardsman Thompson, I need to attach some sensors to monitor your neural activity while we review the incident. This won't hurt, but it might feel strange. As Dr. Mitchell placed electrodes on Marcus's temples and wrists, Davies continued his explanation. We believe that Dr. Vasquez's consciousness transfer technology works both ways. While she can extract information from others, the process may also leave traces of her own mental patterns in the minds of people she contacts. What does that mean for me? Marcus asked, though he wasn't sure he wanted to know the answer. Dr. Mitchell began calibrating her equipment. It means you may be able to sense her presence when she's nearby, even if she's occupying a different body. Think of it as a kind of mental fingerprint that your brain learned to recognize during your initial contact. The testing process took several hours. Marcus was asked to recall every detail of his encounter with the child. From the moment he first noticed her until she disappeared from the scene, the electronic sensors recorded his brain activity while he relived each moment, paying particular attention to the instant when he had seen her face transform. Fascinating, Dr. Mitchell murmured, studying the readouts. Your neural patterns show a significant spike in areas associated with recognition and emotional bonding at the precise moment you describe seeing the transformation. It's as if your brain recognized something familiar. Even though logically you were looking at a stranger, Davies leaned over the data. Can we use this to track her? Potentially. If Guardsman Thompson is brought into proximity with Dr. Vasquez again, regardless of what body she's occupying, his brain should show similar recognition patterns. We could use him as a kind of biological detector. Marcus felt like he was being discussed as a piece of equipment, rather than a person. What exactly are you asking me to do? Davies turned to face him directly. We're asking you to act as bait. We'll position you in locations where we believe she might attempt to make contact again, and monitor your responses to help us identify her. And if she tries to extract more information from me, Dr. Mitchell adjusted her equipment. We can provide you with mental shielding techniques that should make it much more difficult for her to access your thoughts. But the protection isn't foolproof. Marcus spent the rest of the day learning meditation and mental discipline techniques that Dr. Mitchell claimed would help protect his mind from intrusion. The concepts were alien to his military training, but he found himself surprisingly adaptable to the mental exercises. That evening, as he returned to his temporary quarters, Marcus received another text message from an unknown number. You cannot hide from what you have become. The connection between us grows stronger. Meet me at the Tower of London tomorrow at 3 p.m. or innocent people will suffer. Evie. Marcus immediately called the number Davies had given him. Within minutes, the inspector arrived with a team of technicians who traced the message and confirmed Marcus's fears. The text was sent from a phone registered to a 10-year-old boy named David Williams, Davies reported. David Williams died in a house fire 2 months ago. She's using another dead child's identity, Marcus said, feeling a growing sense of dread, and she's specifically requesting to meet with you. This confirms our theory that she extracted information during your first contact, and now wants more. Davies began pacing the small room. The Tower of London is one of the most secure tourist attractions in London, with extensive surveillance and armed guards. If she's willing to meet there, suggests she has considerable confidence in her abilities. Marcus looked at the message again. She threatened innocent people if I don't show up. We can't ignore that. No, we can't. which means we're going to give her exactly what she wants with some modifications she won't expect. Davies outlined a plan that involved dozens of undercover officers, surveillance equipment, and contingency protocols for every possible scenario. Marcus would attend the meeting as requested, but he would be surrounded by support that Dr. Vasquez wouldn't detect. As the team prepared for the next day's operation, Marcus found himself thinking about the little girl he had rescued. Somewhere inside that child's body was the consciousness of a brilliant scientist who had achieved something that shouldn't be possible. But what did she want? What was worth the risk of exposure and capture? The answers would come tomorrow at the Tower of London. But Marcus had a growing suspicion that the encounter would reveal dangers far greater than anyone had imagined. The woman who could inhabit other bodies had chosen him for a reason, and he was about to discover what that reason was. The Tower of London at 3 o'clock on a Tuesday afternoon was crowded with tourists and school groups. Exactly as Dr. Vasquez would have anticipated, Marcus walked through the ancient fortress grounds wearing civilian clothes and a nearly invisible earpiece. It kept him connected to Davies and the surveillance team positioned throughout the area. Remember? Dr. Mitchell's voice whispered through the earpiece. Focus on the mental shielding techniques we practiced. If you feel that same recognition response you experienced at the palace, signal immediately. Marcus nodded slightly as he made his way toward the White Tower, the heart of the historic complex. Around him, dozens of undercover officers posed as tourists, guides, and maintenance workers, all ready to move the moment Dr. Vasquez revealed herself. He didn't have to wait long. Near the Crown Jewels exhibition, Marcus felt a familiar, tingling sensation, as if the air itself had become charged with electricity. His enhanced awareness, trained by Dr. Mitchell's sessions, immediately recognized the neural signature he had encountered at Buckingham Palace. Contact, he whispered into his microphone, trying to keep his voice casual as he scanned the crowd. Then he saw her, not the blonde girl from the palace, but a dark-haired boy of about 10 years old, standing alone beside the barrier that separated tourists from the Crown Jewels display. The child was staring intently at the imperial state crown, but there was something in his posture, his focus, that screamed adult consciousness. As Marcus approached, the boy turned to look at him directly. The moment their eyes met, Marcus felt the same electric shock of recognition he had experienced during the rescue. This was definitely Dr. Elena Vasquez, somehow inhabiting yet another child's body. "Hello, Marcus," the boy said in a voice that was unmistakably young but carried inflections that spoke of decades of experience. "Thank you for coming. What do you want?" Marcus kept his voice low, aware that dozens of his colleagues were listening to every word. The boy who was Vasquez smiled, an expression that was deeply unsettling on such a young face. "I want you to understand something very important about what happened at the palace. That truck didn't have brake failure." Marcus felt his blood run cold. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that I arranged for that truck to lose its brakes at precisely the right moment to create a situation where you would be forced to break protocol and make physical contact with me." The boy's eyes held a calculating intelligence that made Marcus's skin crawl. "Everything that happened was planned. You could have been killed. You put an innocent child's body at risk for what, some kind of experiment?" The boy shook his head. "The body I was using wasn't innocent, Marcus. Sophie Chen wasn't deceased as your Inspector Davies believes. She was my first successful test subject. A terminally ill child whose parents agreed to let me use her. Failing body as a host while her consciousness was elsewhere." Marcus struggled to process this information. "Where?" "In my original body, which is being kept alive in a medical facility I control. I've developed a way to swap consciousness between bodies, but the process has limitations. The host body can only sustain a foreign consciousness for a limited time before beginning to reject." Marcus could hear Davies and his team frantically coordinating their response to this revelation. But the boy continued speaking as if unaware of the surveillance. "The ethereal Sophie Chen is currently experiencing life in my adult body, receiving the best medical care available while her own body served as my vessel. When my mission is complete, we'll swap back." And she returned to her family with her illness mysteriously, cured a side effect of the consciousness transfer process. Marcus felt a mixture of horror and fascination. What mission? The boy gestured toward the crown jewels display. I need access to something in this exhibition, something that has nothing to do with gold or precious stones. Hidden within the imperial state crown is a quantum processing device technology that was secretly installed during a recent restoration and is now being used for purposes that threaten global security. That's impossible. The crown jewels are monitored constantly, examined by experts who don't know what to look for, the boy interrupted. The device is microscopic, integrated into the crown's structure in a way that appears to be part of the original metalwork. But it's actually a quantum computer capable of processing encrypted communications from intelligence agencies around the world. Davy's voice crackled through Marcus's earpiece. Keep him talking. We're analyzing everything he's saying. Marcus tried to maintain his composure. Even if that were true, why tell me? Why not just steal the device yourself? The boy laughed, a sound that was even more disturbing coming from a child's throat. Because I can't get close enough to the crown without triggering security protocols. But you can. Your enhanced security clearance, your access to palace systems, and most importantly, your neural patterns now carry traces of my consciousness signature. What does that mean? It means that when you approach the crown, the quantum device will recognize you as an extension of my awareness. It will respond to your presence by downloading its entire database directly into your mind, the same neural pathways that I mapped. During our first contact, Marcus felt as if the ground was shifting beneath his feet. You used me. The rescue, the connection. It was all to turn me into some kind of biological storage device. Not storage, Marcus. A delivery system. Once the data is transferred to you, I can extract it during our next physical contact. You'll experience the download as nothing more than a brief headache, but you'll be carrying the intelligence secrets of 6 nations. Through his earpiece, Marcus heard Dr. Mitchell's urgent voice. The neural pathways he's describing could cause permanent brain damage. Don't let him manipulate you into approaching the crown. But the boy seemed to sense Marcus's hesitation. I should mention that the other children I'm currently controlling are positioned near several schools around London. If you don't cooperate, those young bodies will be used to create incidents that will make yesterday's truck crash look like a minor accident. Marcus felt trapped between impossible choices. You're threatening to murder children. I'm threatening to use resources at my disposal to achieve a necessary goal. The quantum device in that crown is collecting information that certain governments plan to use to destabilize global markets and trigger international conflicts. I'm trying to prevent a war, Marcus, but I need your help to do it. The conviction in the boy's voice was unsettling. Despite the horrific means she was employing, Dr. Vasquez seemed to genuinely believe she was acting to prevent a greater catastrophe. Even if I believed you, Marcus said. I can't just walk up to the crown jewels and touch the imperial state crown. The security systems would stop me long before. I got close enough. The boy smiled again. That's where your colleagues listening to this conversation come in. Inspector Davies has the authority to arrange a special security inspection of the crown. All he has to do is request access for his expert consultant, you, and the device will do the rest. Marcus realized that Dr. Vasquez had known about the surveillance all along. She had planned for Davies and his team to overhear this conversation, counting on them to make the exact decision she needed. Through his earpiece, he heard Davies' frustrated voice. She's manipulating us into giving her exactly what she wants. But if she's telling the truth about the other children, ... double quotes, the boy looked directly at Marcus. And for a moment, he saw something that looked almost like genuine regret in those young eyes. I know what you're thinking, Marcus. You're wondering if there's another way. If you can somehow outmaneuver me or save everyone without cooperating. Marcus said nothing, but his expression must have given away his thoughts. There isn't, the boy continued sadly. I've been planning this for months, accounting for every variable, every possible response. The only way to end this without massive casualties is for you to help me complete my mission. As Marcus stood in the Tower of London, surrounded by centuries of history and faced with an impossible choice. He realized that the young body in front of him contained not just the consciousness of a brilliant scientist, but someone who might be the only person capable of preventing a global catastrophe. The question that would determine the fate of countless innocent lives was simple but terrible. Could he trust Dr. Elena Vasquez with the secrets of nations, even if refusing meant watching children die? The decision came down to an emergency meeting in the tower's administrative offices, with Marcus, Inspector Davies, Dr. Mitchell, and several high-ranking officials debating the most critical choice any of them had ever faced. Through the windows, they could see the boy who was Vasquez sitting patiently on a bench, apparently content to wait while they decided the fate of nations. "We've confirmed her claims about the other children," Davies reported grimly, ending a phone call with his operations center. "Surveillance teams have identified 12 minors in strategic positions around London, all exhibiting the behavioral patterns consistent with adult consciousness control." Dr. Mitchell pulled up a brain scan on her tablet. "The neural pathways she described are real. If Marcus approaches the crown and triggers the download she mentioned, the quantum data transfer could cause severe cognitive damage or even complete personality dissolution." One of the officials, a stern man from the Foreign Office, leaned forward. "And if we don't cooperate, we potentially face multiple terrorist incidents involving children, plus the continued existence of an illegal surveillance system embedded in our most sacred national symbols." Marcus sat quietly, listening to the debate about his fate and the lives of innocent children. Finally, he spoke up. "What if there's a third option?" Everyone turned to look at him. "Explain," Davies said. "Dr. Vasquez expects me to approach the crown and download the quantum data so she can extract it later. But what if we modify the process? What if instead of simply downloading the data, we upload something to the quantum device?" Dr. Mitchell's eyes widened with understanding. "You mean use the neural connection to introduce a virus or shutdown command into the system?" "Exactly. If the device recognizes me as an extension of her consciousness, it might accept commands from me as if they were coming from her." The Foreign Office official looked skeptical. "That assumes we can create such a command system in time, and that you can survive the neural interface long enough to implement it." Dr. Mitchell was already working on her tablet, pulling up complex diagrams and code structures. "It's theoretically possible. We could encode a shutdown sequence into Marcus's neural patterns, disguised as normal thought processes. When the quantum device attempts to download data from his mind, it would instead receive the termination command." Davies stood up, pacing the small room. "And the children she's controlling?" Marcus had been thinking about this too. "If we can shut down the quantum device without her knowing what we've done, she'll still expect to extract the intelligence data from me during our next contact. That gives us time to locate her original body and interrupt the consciousness transfer process. It's an enormous risk," the official warned. "If any part of this plan fails, we could end up with dead children and an enemy who has access to state secrets from 6 nations. Marcus looked out the window at the boy sitting on the bench. Somewhere inside that small body was a brilliant woman who believed she was saving the world, even as she threatened to destroy innocent lives to achieve her goals. "I understand the risks," Marcus said firmly. "But I also understand that doing nothing guarantees the outcome she wants. At least this way, we have a chance to stop her and save everyone." The next 2 hours were a blur of preparation. Dr. Mitchell worked with computer specialists to encode the shutdown sequence into neural patterns that Marcus could carry in his subconscious mind. Davies coordinated with security to arrange access to the Crown Jewels exhibition. Teams were positioned to track the controlled children and locate Dr. Vasquez's medical facility as evening approached. Marcus found himself standing before the imperial state crown, separated from it by bulletproof glass and multiple layers of security that had been temporarily disarmed for his special inspection. The crown was magnificent, over 2,800 diamonds, plus rubies, emeralds, sapphires, and pearls set in gold and platinum. But as Marcus studied it closely, he began to see what Dr. Vasquez had described: tiny irregularities in the metalwork that could hide microscopic technology, Patterns in the gem settings that might serve as data transmission arrays. The subject is moving. Davy's voice came through his earpiece. The boy has entered the exhibition hall and is approaching your position, Marcus. Took a deep breath and stepped closer to the crown. Immediately, he felt a strange humming sensation, as if the jewelry was resonating at a frequency only his modified brain could detect, neural activity spiking. Dr. Mitchell reported from her monitoring station, "The quantum interface is activating." Pain shot through Marcus's skull like lightning. But instead of the simple data download Dr. Vasquez had predicted, he felt his consciousness expanding, connecting to a vast network of information that seemed to span the globe. For a terrifying moment, he saw through the quantum device's sensors, satellite communications, encrypted military transmissions, intelligence reports from agencies he had never heard of, but buried in his subconscious mind. The shutdown sequence Dr. Mitchell had implanted began to activate. Instead of absorbing the intelligence data, Marcus felt his mind pushing back, injecting the termination code into the quantum system's core processors. The effect was immediate and catastrophic for the device. The humming sensation cut off abruptly. Marcus sensed the quantum computer's network connections severing one by one as the shutdown cascade propagated through its systems. "Marcus," the boy's voice behind him sounded concerned. "What's happening?" "I can sense that something's wrong with the interface." Marcus turned to face Dr. Vasquez. And for the first time since this ordeal began, he had the advantage. "The download failed. The quantum device rejected my neural signature." The boy's expression shifted from concern to suspicion. "That's impossible." "The interface was specifically calibrated too." He stopped speaking abruptly, his eyes widening with realization. "You sabotaged it. You destroyed the quantum system. The intelligence data is gone," Marcus confirmed. "Your mission is over." But instead of the anger or defeat Marcus expected, the boy began to smile. "You clever, clever man. You actually think you've won." Before Marcus could respond, felt a familiar electric sensation, much stronger than before. The boy was standing several feet away. But somehow Marcus could feel Dr. Vasquez's consciousness reaching out to him directly. "The quantum device was never my primary objective," the boy said, his voice carrying harmonics that resonated in Marcus's bones. "It was bait. What I really needed was a direct neural link to someone with your security clearance. Someone whose mind I could map completely during a moment of technological interface." Marcus felt his consciousness being invaded. His memories and knowledge pulled from his mind with surgical precision. Information about palace security guard rotations, royal family schedules, protection protocols flowed from his brain to Dr. Vasquez's awareness. The quantum device was just the delivery system. She explained as she systematically extracted years of classified information from his mind. "Now I have everything I need to complete my real mission, ensuring that certain members of the royal family never have the opportunity to implement their plans for global financial manipulation through the neural link." Marcus saw flashes of Dr. Vasquez's true intentions. The consciousness transfer technology wasn't just about espionage, it was about assassination. She planned to use controlled children to get close to members of the royal family during public events, then switch their consciousness with adult operatives at the critical moment. "Davies," Marcus managed to shout through the mental invasion. "She's not after intelligence. She's planning to assassinate the royals." But even as security teams converged on their position, Marcus knew it might be too late. Dr. Vasquez had the information she needed, and somewhere across London, other children under her control were already moving into position for attacks that no one would see coming until it was too late. The boy stepped back, breaking the neural connection but leaving Marcus's mind reeling from the violation. "Thank you, Marcus. You've been far more helpful than you could possibly imagine." As security officers surrounded the boy, Dr. Vasquez's consciousness simply vanished from the child's body, leaving behind a confused and terrified 10-year-old who had no memory of the past hour. "She's gone," Marcus said, struggling to clear his thoughts. "But she has everything she needs now. We have to protect the royal family. She's going to use children as assassins." Davies was already coordinating the response. But Marcus knew they were facing an enemy who could strike from anywhere, using weapons no one would suspect until it was too late. The little girl he had saved at Buckingham Palace had led him into a trap that threatened the very foundation of the British monarchy. The only question now was whether they could stop Dr. Elena Vasquez before she used her terrible gift to change the course of history forever. As emergency protocols activated across London and every member of the royal family was placed under maximum protection, Marcus realized that his split-second decision to save a child had set in motion events that would determine the fate of nations. The woman who could inhabit other bodies had finally revealed her true purpose, and the most dangerous phase of her plan was just beginning. The royal guard, who had broken protocol to save a life, now faced the possibility that his heroic act had doomed the very people he had sworn to protect. In trying to save one child, he might have condemned an entire family to death at the hands of enemies they would never see coming.